Reuben, how was your day so far?
Excellent. Post-summer, but still feeling a little like summer. So it's nice. It's nice to take a little walk.
So why don't we get started now? Thank you all for coming. I'm Andrew Ackerman. I'm the Managing Director for Dreamit Urbantech. We are a fund that invests, my part of the fund invests in real estate technology, aka prop tech and construction tech. I have with us the CEO of one of our portfolio company, StringBean. Reuben, why don't you tell them a little about your background, and then we'll get into how you've been selling to the customers that we just talked about.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. It's a pleasure to be here. Really appreciate it. And hello, everybody out there in LinkedIn world and Twitter world, or wherever you are. I'm a former banker who moved from investment banking to the operations side when Manufacturers Hanover, Chemical, and Chase Manhattan Bank were being put together. I was given the dubious task of leading that effort, and at a time when there was a whole renaissance going on as it related to technology and financial services, kind of like where we are today with real estate. I met a young gentleman while I was there who was able to explain to me everything associated with technology, and de facto I learned a lot about technology. He and I left Chase together at the same time in March of 2000 to our first startup called Closing Guard, and about 2 years later we did some roll-ups and we were able to exit that. So that was a great opportunity for me at a much younger age to experience what that was all about.
2001.
It was. I remember it was literally a month before the bubble burst. I walked out thinking that I was getting involved in some wonderful things, and then boom, we all got shocked. But it was the best decision I ever made in retrospect. I spent about 8 years after that doing roll-ups and startups for different funds. I had a couple additional exits, and after I had put together a couple of dollars, I bought into a trade services company. I was always a guy who would focus on lots of people, lots of paper, lots of chaos, and so I found 65 guys running around in trucks 24/7 doing fire and environmental services. And I bought into this company, and 10 years later we were able to turn this company into a very, very different kind of company, went completely up market, selling into the top property management organizations, facilities, all the landmark properties here in the tri-state, and that's really what exposed me to the demands of the facility management community.
And that's what led to StringBean ultimately.
Well, that's, definitely spawned it. I did a lot of listening, that's really important, hearing what my clients liked about the way we were servicing them, what they didn't like. And eventually I called up this young gentleman, Richard Chung, who had left Chase with me and since became a very senior guy over at Starwood Hotel and Resorts. And we got together one day and I said, Richard, I got an idea. And so 3 years ago, we went from napkins and a bunch of placemats and drawings to start what's today's StringBean Technologies.
Cool. So let's jump right in there. Clearly, you've been doing this for a bunch of years, and you've done it from a bunch of different ways. The number one thing for sales is getting inside the mind of the buyer. And in real estate and prop tech, that's actually not as simple as it seems, even for someone with years of experience. You want to talk a little bit about what it means when you say the buyer? Is it one person, multiple people? How do you understand what motivates them? Just talk people through who might be a little new to it about how you think about that.
Sure. Look, when you're going into large prop tech organizations to sell enterprise SaaS, you got to be a dragon slayer, and these dragons have many, many heads. You've got the actual users themselves who are going to use your product. They don't have the same level of motivation as the people who are actually going to pay the bills. And you have to be able to figure out how to create a brand story that really meets up with all of them. And then as you win over the hearts and minds of the folks that will ultimately lead you either downstream or back upstream, you have to change your nomenclature, and you have to, there's always a villain when you're dealing with someone, and there's always a hero, and it's not you. It's not you, the guy who's selling. So you really have to be able to walk in and understand what the hot spots are really, really quickly, and figure out how to run a string through all those beans, and ultimately create like a common ground where everyone can work.
Let's make it really concrete for them. So At StringBean, draw them a picture of like who's the guy that actually uses it, like the basement of a 30-story office building. Who are you talking to when you talk about the user?
So the ultimate users for us really are two. So one is the actual custodian, the building engineer, the vendors in some cases, and it's not the boss of the vendor who worked with procurement to sell the deal. We're talking everyday folks who speak in simple terms. They're just trying to get their job done. And talking to these people, examples of a couple of examples. I had one building engineer turn to me and said, when I want to make sure my guys get their job done, they hide soda cans. I hide soda cans in the strainers of the pumps. And then I say, okay, go do your pump rounds and let me know if everything checked out. And if they told me later that they checked out, I know that they didn't do the job. And that's the way in which this kind of relationship goes sometimes between workers and their supervisors. On the other hand, we've also seen a lot of sophistication going on there. You're talking, particularly in enterprise buildings, you're talking about a lot of technology, mechanical systems. These guys are very, very well trained. There's BMS systems, there's IoT. Everybody's kind of got that whole lingo down, and as you're kind of working your way up and down, you've really got to be able to establish this connection to them. And I'm a guy, I'm over 50 years old. My kids taught me all kinds of nomenclature as I was moving from talking to them on the phone to talking to them like this with my thumbs. And I was with a guy who was about my age recently, and he turned around and told me, I don't ever want to hear the word hashtag. Just doesn't like the word hashtag. So, you got to be able to pick up on these subtle nuances and make sure they understand that they're the client. On the other hand, the guys upstairs who actually pay the bills, they're looking at the analytics. They're looking at the dollars and cents. They're looking, they talk in big sentences, and these are very, very savvy guys. You have to be talking to them about, listen, I'm going to give you everything you can get in SAP and Informatica that costs IBM or some major corporation like millions of dollars to install. I'm going to give you that at the building budget. I'm giving you ERP for your building. So you have to be able to really move on and make sure to check your language depending on who you're talking to. And if they're all in the same room, you got to find that common ground. It's really important.
If they're wearing a suit and tie sitting around a board table, you can sometimes get away with ERP for buildings. But if they're the guys in the shirts that have their name on it and they have a key ring with 100 keys on it, that's not how you're going to pitch it.
No, but some of these guys grew up with their names on their shirts, and now they're wearing white. They're wearing white shirts. So white collar, blue collar, it really doesn't matter. There's an emotional intelligence that you have to be able to have, and it's a cultural thing that we really work hard to build at our company to understand. And again, it's about them. It's not about you. We as founders, we put our lives into these things, and we walk in and we're just really trying to push our agenda. You got to check that at the door. You got to check your ego at the door, and you really got to. It's a balancing act. But I will say this: you really have to be prepared for all of them and all their objections, all their questions. When they start telling you, okay, we want to hire you guys, here's a contract. And then you read the contract and it's a work for hire contract. It's not a SaaS contract. Some of these people are not as sophisticated behind the scenes. They're busy hiring, plumbing guys, and their contracts talk to that and require $10 million insurance umbrella policies when I'm just giving you guys an app. So the more you're prepared to object to some of their requirements with good reasoning, be able to give them good quote unquote case law, although this is not a legal issue, but being able to show them
standard practices.
Yeah, and you got to be able to run with that really, and they get a lot of confidence when they realize that you understand how everything's going on behind the scenes and the challenges and the hurdles and the dominoes that have to fall for them. And as soon as you can kind of connect with them on that, it just reduces a level of objectivity.
Okay, so key takeaways. Number one, multiple stakeholders, very different backgrounds, and even within the backgrounds, you never know until you've actually started talking to them. The guy that's wearing a suit and tie today may have started off down on the floor of the building. So you really have to take the time to know who you're talking to, pick the language that works for them, not the way you're used to thinking about it, and then be prepared as you walk them through it to, with empathy, walk them through about what's probably not the way they're used to doing business in many respects.
And I also learned something a little bit the hard way. Again, it's trial and error for all of us, but to the extent I can share some of these rules, no two organizations are alike.
Nope.
You're dealing with CBRE or Cushman & Wakefield or Jones Lang LaSalle. They don't own their properties. They are service providers. They're managed services agreements. When they get paid, you get paid. And you've got to be able to kind of understand that and be able to manage expectations from a cash flow perspective. If you sell into the building engineer and you go ahead and get a foothold in the engineer, you may not be able to land and expand that quickly because the building down the block that's managed by that same organization answers to a whole different budget and everything like that. On the other hand, there are owner managers, the Rudens of the world, the Relateds of the world, RXR. They have a very, very different perspective. They're employing their own management organizations. And that decision making, and to the extent, again, getting back to slaying the dragons, understanding where those heads are, where the central decision making power is, and how to kind of play that continuum up and down the aisle. It's an art. It's not a science.
Let's drill into that a little bit. So we talked about the different people and personalities. These are more structural elements. When you're talking with large enterprise, you've got things like budgeting, you've got how the P&L was cut up, and you've got different actors. So you started talking, let's take what's possibly a simplest case, but by no means simple. I'm the owner-operator of my own building, right? So I don't have to play this game between the prop managers charging me for X. I'm all of that. You spoke a moment ago about, like, if you've sold into one building, that doesn't mean you automatically get to do 20 other buildings down the street. Let's talk a little bit more about that, because land and expand is a critical element of most enterprise sales. In prop tech in particular, in real estate, what are the barriers? Like, after 6 months, if it's going really well, why aren't you selling to 20 buildings and then their entire portfolio?
Wow. Look, you have to really be able to make the kind of friends up front when you meet them that are going to help you kind of navigate the environment. We've been very fortunate to really hone in on that. It depends where you start in the organization. Like when we worked with Dreamit and they brought us into Reuben Management, you were able to get me in front of John Gilbert, the Chief Operating Officer. There I am, one-on-one with him, and he's built a major energy management technology. He's really the granddaddy of that, and that was once I was able to posture appropriately with him, and literally it was amazing. It was like, as soon as he cut me off probably 5 minutes into my deck and just said, show it to me.
And
then he wanted to show me Nantum, and one thing led to the other. Now, sure, can I swallow all 31 of those properties in one shot? Absolutely not. You'd be setting yourself up for failure. So as we came down the organization a little bit and understood, understanding how much you can bite off, how much you can chew, what their posturing is, and really setting up what the expectations and the KPIs of a proof of concept needs to look like up front is really, really important. And
so before my buffer fills up, so when you're going with the top down, you can actually get to the point of like, hey, John, let's pick 2 buildings up front, and if in 6 months success looks like this, the rollout plan becomes more as you might expect, right? You're purposeful about it. You know that the end goal for the relationship will be ultimately rolling it out at a pace that makes sense for both parties. Now flip it. Let's say you sold into one building and they love you. Then what happens?
So it really depends. Are you talking a new building that's under construction, that's now going live to operations? That's one kind of element. Or is it an existing building with lots of habits? I don't want to call them bad habits because, sometimes people don't think things are broken. So why fix them? So I'll kind of address both of them. We found that coming into a new property or new complex that's being built, and we've been involved in some really, really, premier ones thus far, thankfully. It was getting into one building There was one live building already, and there was one building moving from construction to operation in 3 months. Now, you have to decide which one you're going for. Are you going to go for the live one and try and dethrone some other technology? Or are you going to try and create a proof of concept and hopefully that's success?
Well, you set it up almost like it's a simple question. In your case, it was.
Well, we went for the new property. There was no bad habits. These guys were really, really stressed. They were under a lot of pressure. You know, they were just delighted to have us around to help them pick up some, you know, some to-dos that were on their lists and kind of get this thing moving. We were really be able to bond with the chief engineers on the ground. They started calling us, and then they started making their own workflows on their own, and it became, and you know, I don't say thank you for your business. I say thank you for innovating with us, because these guys, they're having their butts kicked, you know, and they're really stressed out. So it's nice to get a little bit of a fresh breath of fresh air. Once the operating property heard that these guys were kind of running with it, then we were able to sit down and say, wow, you guys are, what? You're using like over 50 different applications to run this property. You know, that one, those go away once you move, you know, those blades and tools over to our little Swiss Army knife here called StringBean, and we were able to win them over. The other thing that happened, which is...
I want to just echo that. So what you're saying, I think, is if you're getting in at the kind of the middle level or lower level of the organization and you get your first win there, that's almost like a referenceable customer. You still have to start the stale again when you move up in the organization to the, you know, the COO level or the central level. There's no guaranteed expansion in that case.
No, and the higher up you go, the more savvy these guys are. And I find that real estate people are really, really, they're very deal oriented. They're very you know, they like to negotiate. They're buying buildings, you know. So as you kind of move up, it's no longer about, you know, sometimes, you know, how much blood can they get out of you, and you got to make sure to have a little blood, you know, in your back pocket, you know, to make them feel like, you know, they're getting a deal.
But that's less so when you move up, is in your experience.
Yeah, once you kind of get up there and you can start showing them the merits of what the entire package is and how this can impact their entire ecosystem, that's when all these guys start leaning forward and they're like, you know, wow, we got to pick this up.
I know you've worked with a lot of different customers. Was there any one time you're like, I'm in the great property, I should be able to move out to everyone, then you got up to the top and you're like, wait a second, that's not how it's going to work?
No, look, there's a lot of turnover. So, you know, you go ahead and grab on coattails and you think those coattails are going to ride you in. You better start finding a couple other coattails, and the faster you can kind of learn about the political climate that's going on inside the company to make sure you hedge yourself. You know, we started with a major global property manager. The guy was a portfolio manager for like 38 buildings in the city. He said, wow, this is fantastic. Let's find us a pilot site. Got us a pilot site, moved very quickly, and then 2 months later, he was gone. We busted our butt to go ahead and really impress that building, the management, the general manager. Everything was working beautifully, and then I went upstairs to the replacement and said, hi, how you doing? I'm Reuben from StringBean. Look what we did. And this particular individual looked at me and said,
who are you and why are you here?
Why are vegetables growing in my building? You know, so, you know, and that whole education process had to start all over again. Yeah. And then once we started getting, you know, that person kind of, you know, a little bit more along the way, then all of a sudden there was an edict from the venture side of that business that we had to now impress the venture people at the building, because no new technology was coming into this portfolio, that the venture people blessed it.
That's another interesting point, right? Now that so many of the large organizations have a chief innovation officer, or they have a corporate venture fund, whether it's by that name or not, or it could be a family office that the family that owns the properties, you know, and they do their onsite. You've often got like a two-stage step where like a two-step sale where you've got to satisfy both halves of it.
Yeah, and the first thing you want to do is look at their fund's portfolio, right? You know, if you got a portfolio conflict and you've seen they made an investment in something that at least recently that might kind of you know, overlap with what you're bringing to the table, you're probably just giving them IP to look at, you know, to help, you know, their investment. So, you know, those guys are motivated to make capital gains, right? The guys on the ground are trying to get this, and when those two conflict, pretty confident the innovation guys are going to kind of get the ear of the top guy a little bit more.
Interesting. I want to go back to something you mentioned a little earlier in passing between the new construction or problem buildings. In your case, it was new construction, but the interesting is when you ask somebody, like you actually go for the ask, capital A, it's important to know what you're asking for. Not just, hey, I'd like to partner with you or innovate with you, but also you're asking for, in many cases, one or two pilots to work on. So it's important, I guess in your case, you tell me if I'm wrong, like you learn fairly often that you should say, hey, I'd like to find one or two pilots, ideally buildings that are just coming out of pre-construction, because you know that set you up for success the best. I mean, do you normally do that, or do you just let them suggest it, or do you give them a little guidance to nudge them in the path of least resistance, or where you know that you can just hit it out of the park the easiest?
Well, with this
and
one,
if you do, does it work?
You know, look, there are guys out there that may be doing a lot of renovation, and that train's left the station, and they've got all kinds of trades and everyone around there. They're all using their technology. So I believe that if you're trying to sell facility management solutions as part of the construction process, that's really fantastic, because then you can go to the construction guys and say, look, instead of handing over all this documentation and just saying to the facility guys, because you know this is such a rush job, you know, let me step in and take all that documentation, set it up in my application, and we'll put this on autopilot and let's create a value-added sale. And I have to say that working with Dreamit, and you guys put us in front of, you know, the Turners and the Skanskas and the Suffolks of the world, you know, that's what we heard. They didn't want to hear more about construction technology. They just wanted to be able to create value-added services. And that's when the light bulb went on for me, hearing it from the construction side. And that's when we were able to really create kind of like 4 or 5 pain points that really resonated really well when we walked in the door. But on the flip side, you know, you have to have those 2 or 3 pain points that you know exist inside an organization. Thankfully, on the facility management side, our biggest competitor remains Excel and clipboards. Yep. Okay, I think Michael Beckerman will tell you we're in the 2nd or 3rd inning of this whole industry. If we are. So, you know, when you walk in there, I love those type of situations, but you have to have your eye on those 1 or 2 point solutions that you know you're going to be able to sunset, and that's how you get back to your land and expand. So I'm going to land, I'm going to give you a solution, I'm going to give you data, I'm going to give you the ability to go upstairs and get those attaboys that you need, and then now let's go ahead and show those guys, and I'd like to make those chief engineers my sales guys, and let them go upstairs and let's you know, and show that they're beginning to drink the Kool-Aid.
So
with
you
the rest of
raised
us.
an interesting point also. What else are they using? So on the one hand, if they're using clipboards and Excel, you have a clean slate. You can go in there and you're not dislodging any other technology, which may have a product champion who recommended that 6 months ago and who will fight tooth and nail because that means he made a mistake. When is it good if they're using other tech?
Well, you have to know who your competitors are. You have to know what the other technologies in use. You know, there's, you know, I don't want to name names, but one technology that we know of is all web-based. There's nothing going on the phone. Our app is actually native to iOS and whatever the application is, and we know that causes delays in getting information. There's nothing more frustrating to a chief engineer when they're sitting in the bowels of a building and they can't get their information.
If you know what they're using, and if it maps onto one of the key pain points, it actually makes it an easier sale. How does that play into budgeting?
So this time of year, this is when most of the budgeting gets done for the entire year. So you really want to be able to cherry pick, you know, those applications that you know you can sunset, try and get in there and show them an ROI on software spend alone.
So you're basically saying you're already paying $100,000 for this software. Use ours, it'll be net zero additional spend, and it's better.
Well, they're not going to give up their technology just because you walked in the front door without any tried and tested. So you got to come in. You want to get paid because all the venture capital guys want to know that you're making revenue.
Oh, and also you want to get paid.
You know, it's nice. It's nice to have a little offset, you know, from cash flow. That revenue solves everything. So you know, you want to be able to get in there and land with that, create small. You know, we were just in a building the other day. They had 70 potential users in that building. The owner of the building said, listen, we just want to give this to 5 users. And I knew that if we started going like, you know, shotgun on all the applications that we could potentially provide them with, we knew we were going to dip beyond those first 5.
And it would take forever for them to say yes.
Yeah, and you're not even tried and tested. You know, there's nothing. So you know, we got together with them. We found the rounds and some of the round sheets and some of the things that, you know, a very small group of these 70 were doing. And then they started suggesting, well, wait a minute, can I go ahead and integrate with this particular technology? Can we go ahead? Because if I could do that, then I can get the porters and I can get the doormen and I can get this. And I'm like, yeah, you know, and, but I'll tell you what, it's budget planning season right now. Let's get in here, let's do that. I'll give you 50, you know, free licenses so you can start getting a taste, getting hooked, and let's see if we can go find some budget later on in the year.
You knew there were 70 licenses to be had in that building, but you let them figure it out.
Well, how else, you know?
You could tell them, but yeah, if they tell themselves it works.
But again, it gets back, I'm not the hero. Okay, this is not about me. I have to make them be the hero, right? I've got to help them share with me who the villain is. I help tell them who the hero is, or, you know, we identify the hero, and I'm here for you. You got to be humble. You know, and that's, and you know, you're there to help them, you know, succeed.
I want to roll with something that you mentioned, right? So you said you chose a subset of your total functionality to start with, and then they figured out they could do X or they could do Y. That's a very product-centric approach to being able to land and expand. Was that purposeful? And if so, like, how do you build that into a product? And you can use specific examples from StringBean if you want to make it really concrete.
Yeah. For instance, asset tagging. You know, we knew early on when we did our betas that asset tagging was going to be important, that guys wanted to be able to get their documentation standing in front of machines.
Just define asset tagging for some people who aren't deep into facility maintenance.
So you have all this equipment, and when I'm standing in front of a boiler and I need to get the cut sheets or I need to get certain information or I want to see historical readings that have been done on it, I have to go find the manuals, I have to go find the logs. So creating document management capabilities was something that, and the ability to put a QR code or an RFID tag on a piece of equipment so that I can gather that information and see what's going on at all times was something we knew they want to have. But that's a big deployment. And that's a big ask of them to walk around and start cataloging all of their assets. But we knew how valuable that would be for them. We had it in our product roadmap. We had some of the functionality already done. But the one thing we didn't know, you know, a lot of these guys have their own Dropbox, they have their own box, they have their own stuff on the behind the scenes. We could create our own, but who am I? I'm just like a little startup. What are you going to do with all my documentation? It's somewhere in an Amazon cloud. I'm not going to get it. So we needed to have that clarification, and that was an opportunity for us. And then as soon as someone turned around and said, listen, can you go ahead and give us, like, you know, bar scans? You know, some of these things have barcodes on them. Can you kind of touch the barcodes and stuff like that? Well, those barcodes are proprietary to the manufacturers. However, you know, we can just go ahead and take information right out of your BIM file, or we can take information out of your CMMS, computerized mechanical maintenance system, create your asset hierarchy, and we could go ahead and start applying. And you can go around as you move around, and you can put the QR codes on yourself.
That's a great example of, you had a hypothesis that certain follow-on modules would be critical, but you let the market ask for it, and you let them guide your development, it sounds like, rather than just go out there and code in a room and hope it was what they wanted. Well,
as a new company, you have a vision. Hopefully you've been listening to your marketplace for a year or two before you really go to market and make your splash. You can't do everything. You can't do all your product development, but if you can go ahead and have some things ready that you take a month or two to go ahead and develop, and then as soon as you get that big ask, be able to reprioritize, which, you know, one of the things that we think is an advantage for us, we have our own development team here. You know, many people who are startup like us, they are offshoring, and that makes it very difficult to change and kind of on a dime. So being very flexible and then being able to turn around to them and say, oh, you know what, I'll tell you what, I'm going to change our priorities a little bit for you, but I need that commitment now. So let's go with an enterprise kind of commitment here, and if I deliver the following to you, the following thing's going to happen. Get me that in writing, and I'll change our priorities, and I'll go deal with our investors and
I'll,
make sure
I'll front load something that we were going to build in 6 months or 12 months because you need it now. If, boom, check is bigger. Let's move from product development to the actual structure of the product or the pricing and how that lets you expand. And it could be anything from freemium to your choice of like, kind of light versions that you might use. I know you employ some of that at StringBean. It's very, very powerful in the direct-to-consumer and the smaller businesses. It's a little trickier when you're dealing with enterprise. Why don't you, if you don't mind, why don't you talk through a little bit about what those kind of types of strategies are, how they may look like in companies that we already know, everyone knows, and then you can show kind of how you used it in StringBean in a large enterprise sales environment.
So OpenView does a lot of stuff, talks a lot about, product-led growth in the B2C space. So you got
define product-led growth.
So product-led growth is a way in which you go ahead and give people a taste of your product, give them enough so that they can go ahead and perceive some value, but you've got to find those points where you actually hold back some functionality that they're going to want to
taste,
experience.
Not enough to sate the hunger.
Yeah, Zoom, for instance, is a great example. I can get, up to 5, conference calls with more than 2 people, but those calls will stop at 40 minutes, and they probably have all kinds of data that, that 40-minute mark is usually, most meetings will go a little bit more than 40 minutes, and then it'll shut off, and all of a sudden it's like, what the hell? Let me just spend the $50 a month and I'll get it. Again, I don't know their pricing that well, but they have figured out places where you can experience Zoom, you can use it, it's great, but I need to be able to take them on a journey so that I can start monetizing.
It's probably optimized for exactly where you go from like the consumer use, which no one's going to pay, but you're probably not going to get a lot of money for, to where you're dealing with businesses that actually need it enough to pay. So they found that exact right strike point between free and premium. So that's good. It's great. It's a direct-to-consumer example where you're dealing with small businesses and ultimately large businesses.
So here we are with this budget planning. PropTech, we got this budget planning season where everything's like approved in this period of time. Maybe there's some discretionary dollars down the line. I don't know. I know I've got them, paying us some money for some functionality. And now you got to start thinking about, listen, what functionality can I give them a taste of now so that I know that when the next budget season rolls around that I can unleash it on the entire organization and get in touch with them in the the August-September timeframe so that, we're having a bigger conversation. And you want to make sure you have all your data and all your analytics and all your, values that, the value system that you've offered them. And that is one thing. The other thing is...
Concrete example.
Well, this example that I just told you before, I've got I've got an agreement to get 5 guys going at a particular property. Mm-hmm. I know there's 70 potential users. I'm like, you know what? Here's 50 limited use licenses. And what does that mean?
Just so we know, what do you mean when you say a limited use license as opposed to a full license?
So I may be able to give you certain functionality that I could give you on your phone, but I'm not going to be able to give you all the web capabilities. We have a workflow builder, for instance, where people are going to all build their own workflows. Well, you can't go ahead and build your workflows. You can't modify your workflows. You have to go, or maybe I'll just give you linear workflows and not the if this then that workflow capability that really helps put your build your property on autopilot. We're still working on it. It's not, it's always something that you have to continually look at and you have to be listening. But I believe that in this type of situation, you've got to be able to put more functionality in the hands of the users and be very, very calculating about knowing when you're going to be able to go ahead and up the ante. But if they feel like you're taking advantage of them and they feel like, listen, I'm going to give you a taste, but I know you're going to want a lot more, that could backfire in a big kind of way. And I've seen it backfire in a big kind of way in other settings, and there's a lot of war stories out there about that. So trying to find how to do that. The other thing is, these guys want a bigger, they want a bigger taste of the functionality for their vendors, for their tenants. So what we did was we said, listen, we'll give you a mobile-only capability to give out to all your vendors and all your tenants so that they can collaborate with you. But once the vendor's in, we have a pest control company, for instance, they called us up afterwards and they said, listen, you know, I was over there and I was looking at the chief engineer and he was doing all this kind of stuff on his phone. How come I don't have that? And I said,
So they had the light version, which let them work in that one building, but then they saw that there was this kind of heavier, that's the wrong example, more functional
correct
version, and then they decided they wanted that for their business.
Right, and they wanted to go ahead and create workflows. Well, how do I go ahead and create workflows? Well, you need to have the StringBean builder in order to what?
The pro version.
Yeah, you want the pro version, no problem. And that's the way it works. Same thing with a commercial cleaning company. So I actually view these properties as actually being able to allow us to expand without even impacting their budget. Because they're bringing their ecosystem in and they're saying, listen, I'm paying your bill, Mr. Electrician, Mr. Plumber, Mr. HVAC guy. I know you've got, you know, these other solutions that you're working, and that's fine for you in your accounting, but I got a nightmare on my hands over here, and you're just going to have to follow suit. And so we'll kind of ride that wave. And it's still, again, being experimented, but we're...
And then the best part, I presume, is when that pest control company goes into a building you've never even heard of, and the facility manager sees what they're using, then it might end up coming full circle with them.
That's what I would hope. That's what I would hope, that, you know, ultimately the vendors can upsell what we're doing, but I don't have enough evidence yet to see that happen. You know, I used to be a vendor to the properties. I walk in there and say, hey, check out this technology I'm working. They'll go, yeah, great, you know. So again, it all gets back, who am I talking to? Because a pest control guy's not talking to the guy in the Eiffel Tower there. So, you know, you have to kind
So
of...
sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. We'll wait and see.
Just gotta...
I want to open up for questions just a minute, but there's one last point I wanted to get to. When you go in there, I mean, you've been in the industry for a couple of decades. I won't tell people how many. Presumably they're more comfortable with you than they might be with some startups. What makes them uncomfortable about, you know, trusting a process in their organization to a startup's technology, and how do you address that?
So they want to know that you're going to be here tomorrow. If they're going to go ahead and take the time to test out your technology, they're not doing this for you know what and giggles, right? So they have to know that you're going to be there tomorrow, and you have to be prepared for that. One element that we've employed is we tell them we're going to escrow our code. So we create a code escrow. There's a fee that they have to pay, that we have to pay, that we pass through to them. But we really have to find ways to make sure that there's continuity with our product if it succeeds. Because, you know, we're a startup. I don't know when you're going to raise money. I don't want you coming back and starting beating us up for more, you know, revenue, because that's how you're going to be able to survive. So they do not want to be held hostage. And I think that, you know, stuff like that. Also, we talked a little bit about the insurance.
So is it more an issue for them that protects them against fee increases, or is it more an issue that they're worried about something happens, you go under, StringBean is now part of their standard operating procedure. If you should go under, they can flip that switch and use the code that you escrowed with them. There's no interruption of service?
I don't know. I believe that that's something that's created buy-in for us. You know, that's worked well for us. The other thing is we actually will send to them all of the information out of our cloud, and we'll update, you know, their side so they have everything in their database.
So they own their data, or at least they have copies of it.
They have everything. Hey, they're doing a lot of stuff in Excel right now. You want it in Excel, we'll give it Excel. You want it ASCII, you know, we'll give it to you comma delimited any way you want it. Many of these big companies are now creating their own service bus environments, so they can take that data, and they have the kind of knowledge and know-how to kind of manipulate the data. So I think I think it means a lot to them when they turn around and say, listen, I'm only as good as my last sale. I'm only as good as my last workflow on my particular device. And for any reason you want to stop doing business with, whether I run out of money or not, I'm going to give you everything you need. This is all, you know, complete transparency. We're partners here. And I actually believe we've won business away from other guys because there was this hold hostage type of thing with the data. We're you know, I don't think
So
that's
it's
a healthy way
easier
to
for
go
them
about
to come in if they know there's an easy exit, for whatever reason.
Well, it gets back to the dragon. I got the risk management guys who are thinking about that. It gets the, you know, the top guy who's paying the bill. I got the users, you know, and you know, it's not just about language, but it's about posturing, and it's being prepared and giving these guys the ability that you thought through their worst nightmares, and you've already figured out how to answer those things.
Let's take some questions from the audience, if we may. You talked a little bit earlier about you get paid when they get paid. So what kind of net terms do you use? And if it varies from the type of customer, you know, start with that. So, you know, an owner manager, how would you invoice them for the services? Assuming on an ongoing basis, not just pilot pricing.
So we obviously give a pretty big discount to get paid up front for the entire year.
So if they pay annually instead of monthly,
Correct.
kind of order of magnitude, is it 10 months, 12 months for the price of 10, or for the price of 8?
We're still working with it, but I would argue that it was probably somewhere about 65 to 70% of the overall price if you pay up front. Otherwise, you want to bill it monthly, it's not a problem.
So plus or minus 12 months for the price of 9.
We have a couple of customers who turned around and we said, listen, I'm going to want the half year up front, and then we'll go quarterly in the last 2 quarters, so that we can kind of do that. In many situations, you want to jump ahead, start getting some work done. Don't worry about the procurement process. We'll follow. Let's get started, because you don't want people to change their minds. So, you know, sometimes you have to go ahead and you know, give some work out up front that you know you're going to get compensated later on.
And then even before you have a formal contract in place in some cases.
Yeah, look, yeah, I've got, you know, authorizations to proceed. That's the big word, you know, for these guys. I'm even authorization to proceed. If I'm a plumber and I've got to do some work on an emergency basis, they'll give it to you in an email. Fine, that's okay with me. But once a month or 2 goes by and I'm still not seeing progress, you know, I'm going to pick up my, you know, head and say, what's going on here?
So is an authorization to proceed like 90% of a signed contract, or 60% of a signed contract?
We've had authorizations to proceed, and they pay pretty quickly after that. On the other hand, back to the construction example, that money is coming from construction funds. Usually, construction funds are being financed by a bank. There's a whole approval process for any bills that get paid in a construction project. So you already have to prepare yourself for delayed payment there. You know, in some cases...
More than net 90?
Oh, yeah. In some cases, it's, you know, it also depends on the building, you know, because one building might be owned by this LP and it may be financed by Chase Manhattan Bank. The other one's that LP and financed by TIAA CREF. Everyone's got their own different things, but understanding from the people that are your buyers up front, you know, what some of those hurdles are going to be, managing those expectations. And
so you can't be shy about asking, because that's going to go right to your working capital.
Of course not. You know, I believe that, you know, look, if you're going to talk about money the moment you on your first date, okay, I think you're going to turn people off. So I believe that you've kind of got to get people, you know, warm. You start working, show that you trust them. But as soon as you kind of feel like, you know, delays are going on, they better have a good excuse. Otherwise, I'm going to start holding back, you know, I'm going to pull back on usage. But I want to get those guys, those users, using my product, liking the product, so that when I do have to pull back, if I ever do it, they're the ones who are going, hey, what the hell, why isn't this thing working?
Understood. Let's move on a little bit. So in prop tech, integrations, right? It's at the point now where, for better or for worse, a lot of buildings have existing systems of some type. It could be Yardi, could be others. And they'll ask you, hey, do you integrate with? How do you handle that? Do you always integrate with them? Do you sometimes integrate? When you don't integrate, how do you respond to that? Hopefully in a way that still makes the sale.
So if it's a real big boy, real established big boy, I will turn to them and I say, I want you to ask them for integration. Because when I pick up the phone and I call Yardi, for instance, and say, hey, I'm a little mom and pop, they're going to hit me up with, you know, whatever their API access fee is, which is
$25,000 per module per year.
Yeah, and there's others like that as well. Although on the other side, Procore, has a pretty much open-ended API, and they're inviting people into their community, which I think is the right way to go.
It's not just the money, though. Sometimes, I mean, the actual bandwidth it takes tech and management to figure out, how do I integrate? Why do I integrate?
So that's what we tell them. I said, listen, you have to give me the exact specifications of what you want, because my imagination's just not good enough. And if they're willing to be committed to doing that, I'll spend the time to do a needs assessment with them. Now, once I understand what the lift is going to be on our end, and the lift ultimately is going to be on their end, that's when I turn the tables a little bit on this and say, now this is a partnership a little bit. You help me, you help us help you by going ahead and get this API. So I'm going to be looking for some sort of sharing of cost when it comes to that. And some of them have turned to me and said, hey, your startup, I want some equity in this thing, and because otherwise I'm not going to pay it. And then you get back to
that becomes fun, I guess. Do they ever come back and at the end of that process they're like, well, I guess we don't need that integration after all?
So I will oftentimes tell people or show them a little bit about our product roadmap. If I actually see that there's something on our product roadmap that allow them to sunset that, I'm going to turn to them and say, listen, in about 2 or 3 months, I'm going to be able to sunset that particular product.
Like, I don't need to integrate with it. We'll kill it.
Correct.
That's not Yardi, though.
No. But look, I don't want to name names for obvious reasons, but there are other ones that we feel we can sunset. And again, they're the ones that said, hey, if you just add this bell or that whistle, I can get rid of this $25,000 of expense, not Yardi, of a particular product that we're using. And that's where, I want you to go ahead and make a commitment that you're going to buy it if I build it for you.
Got it. Super. Okay. Do you get the question like, that's great, I love what you're doing, but how does that hit my NOI?
Your NOI?
Net operating income. I mean, don't they hit you with that, or it's just easier for them because this is the budget I've set up for software, and how do you get under that? Like for your particular sale, how do they phrase that show me the money objection?
Today it's really about data. They're lacking data, and they know how much they can do if they have the data, and they can't get data out of 50 different point solutions that aren't talking to each other. They cannot get data out of Excel and clipboards. When we start showing them some of the data that we've been collecting, and we show them what kind of decisions they can make, what kind of labor savings they can have, vendor procurement, on the procurement side, opening their eyes up to all kinds of information, I think that, it speaks for itself. But again, on the proof of concept on the land, if I can go ahead and make an ROI on software spend alone, then everything else is gravy train. But beyond that, if you really want to expand, you want an installation of 200, 300, 400 users across an entire portfolio, you're going to have a lot more than that, and you're going to have to work with them for a while to prove that to them. We're certainly, and I see a lot of my peers, at the shows, and the startup booths and whatnot. They're not jumping at the bit, unless you've got that kind of next level, type of data. And we're getting there.
Got it. So it's an easier sell in your case, because in a lot of cases, they're saving money from the get-go and getting better responses. It's harder to do it if you're making a case of spend more but get better. Spend less and get better is an easy one.
You know what? Some of them just want to be able to say that they're involved in innovation. So, they'll put a little bit of some, discretionary income in that direction, but they're just not. I think you need to have more. At least, if I was on the buy side of this thing, I have to have more. Again, we're talking about an industry that's 2 decades behind where many other industries are as far as the revolution of technology. So right now they're all looking for this thing, and there's older technology out there that's helping us sell because it's older, and it just doesn't do what we want.
Quick question here, and I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. Are there any thought leaders in the prop tech space that you read or listen to on podcasts that you would say, hey, if you have 20 minutes a week to follow somebody, you should follow this?
Look, I like to follow the top guys at some of these owner-operators, John Gilbert's of the world, Bill Rudin, Scott Rexler, some of the guys at the top of JLL, and there are guys out there that are really talking a lot about what they're seeing, where their appetite is. For me, that's more interesting because I'm trying to solve their pain. I'm less interested in hearing about how a founder or CEO of a big prop tech company, did what he did.
So you're less interested in what we're doing now.
I don't want to listen to myself. I want to listen to other people teach me how I can solve their problems. I do believe that hopefully there's an audience out there of folks that can take my learning that I've done here. The other thing that I do a lot of listening to, I have a co-founder, he's kind of like got the Book of the Month Club. He's right now, pushing this book, what is it called? Building a Story Brand, by Donald Miller. This whole notion, and you heard me say it earlier, there's a villain, there's a hero, there's a story, there's different stories for different people, making it simple, using the words that resonate, staying away from the words that distract and detract from the sale. For me, those are really important messages because, these are my buyers and I need to know how to talk to them. So,
well, we're bumping up, almost up against the hour. So last question, what should I have asked that I didn't ask, or any parting thoughts you'd like to add?
I appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys here at Dreamit. It's nice to have an opportunity to learn from you guys. This type of exposure has been terrific. I don't have any particular questions that I come off top of mind. The most important thing that I can leave the listeners with is that you got to have fun. This is hard stuff. I got 80 bosses a day between employees and customers and all these different, up and down. And if you're not having fun, and the one question you didn't ask is, how do we make sure we have fun? When you're working the long hours and so on and so forth, and you have to build families. We build families at the company culture. We build families with our customers. The ability to, literally have guys call you up and say, hey, I built freeze checks today for my building. And you're just like really, really excited for them. And you feel like, there's more to it than just, the business elements, and that's good energy, and that's something we like
really to appreciate it. Is it all right with you if any of the listeners have specific questions and want to reach out to you directly?
Absolutely.
So how do they do that?
founder@stringbean.tech. Okay, I think it might be founders with an S at the end. I'm not exactly sure. Founder or founders@stringbean.tech. But if you go ahead and send in a question there, I'll certainly make sure that the folks at the office kind of create a list for me so I can kind of focus on it and get back to you all.
And do Reuben a favor, put something informative in the subject line, like follow-up question from Dreamit Live. That way at least he knows what we're talking about.
You taught me that, man.
Yep. Only took you a couple of weeks to get that one. And if you have any questions about Dreamit, about what we invest in, more than welcome to reach out to me directly. I'm Andrew@dreamit.com. Anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and come back soon.
Farewell, folks.